Hey everyone, I am super excited to let you know that version 2.0 of my Displacer tool for Unreal Engine 5 is now available. And not to mention, it is actually available on the Unreal Marketplace now, not just ArtStation. So now you can easily get it in your Epic Launcher and inject it right into your projects. It's super easy and super simple. And the next big update is snow generation. So I've added a whole new blueprint system for adding snow to your displacer, and not just your displacer, but pretty much any static mesh in your project. So if you haven't checked out the Displacer tool, make sure you check out this video here and you can check it out and see, how to use Displacer. I'm not going to cover that in this video. I'm mainly going to cover the snow generation blueprint. And of course, we've moved a few things around in the folder system, so I'll briefly go over that too. So let's get started. First things first, once you start up a new project and a new level, you need to make sure that the geometry script plugin is enabled. So head on over to your plugins and search geometry script and make sure that is enabled. You will need to restart your project when you do. So I've already added the Displacer tool to my project here. This is a blank project with a blank level. And let's take a quick look in our content drawer. We have our Displacer folder here. I've reorganized a few of the folders here, so things might be in slightly different places since version 1.0. So we have our blueprints folder here, which now has our Displacer and our SnowGen blueprints. We also have an icon folder, which gives you some nice, beautiful icons of the actual blueprints when they're in your scene, makes it a little bit easier to find them. We have our maps here, which is our overview of our displacements, displacer sample level, and also our snow generation level, which we'll take a look at here in just a minute. We have our materials folder, which contains a bunch of beautiful, nice sample materials, as well as a snow material that I created for the snow generation. And we also have our meshes folder here, which has our 3 original sample meshes, along with a custom photogrammetry scan of a rock face that I did myself that we'll be using for the snow generation sample here. So I went ahead and opened up the snow generation sample level here, and you can see we got a few meshes here. The one on the left, this rock here, is actually a static mesh, and I also have 2 displacer tools placed here with some mesh on them. We're going to be able to generate some snow on all 3 of these. And you'll notice right away that there is no snow on these. There appears to be some snow on this rock face here, but that's actually just a blended snow material. We're going to actually add geometry-based snow, and it's really cool. But you're going to notice right away that there is no snow. So every time you open up the level, as long as the snow generation is still within the blueprint, it resets. Not resets, but you don't see it visually each time you load the level. So when you first load up the level, you will need to regenerate the snow again. However, later down the road, you can always export it as a static mesh, and of course it will be there because it's just a static mesh. So let's dive in a little bit deeper and show you how to use the tool. I do have a little bit of information and text here within the level that you can check out, help guide you through the steps on how to use it. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at this flat plane here, which obviously is not flat because this is using our Displacer tool. And you can see we have some nice, beautiful icons here for selecting the blueprint. This is our Displacer icon, and I have a SnowGen icon above that. The position of the actual snow generator does not matter because it is relative to the actual placement of the mesh that you select for the actual snow generation. So let's take a quick look. We have our snow gen blueprint selected here, and we have some options here on the left side. So by default, it's already going to have a custom generated snow material that I've worked on for this plugin. You're also going to have a raycast mesh actors. This area, you're actually not going to change anything yourself. It's going to generate that automatically. And you're going to see here a section called Snow Generator. So we have some drop downs here that we're going to go ahead and open up. We have Snow, Remesh, and Displacement. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to tell the snow generator to target a mesh or even a displacer blueprint in our scene so that it knows what to generate the snow on. So under the snow category here, we have meshes to add snow to, and you can see that we can actually choose multiple options for this. Now be careful adding too many options or objects in your scene into this because Then it starts to want to calculate many things on several different meshes. I usually recommend, if you can, just keep it to one mesh. However, you do have the option of doing multiples here. So I already have one selected in here. However, you would just normally click the add element. And what you can do is simply use the eyedropper to select whatever mesh in your scene that you want. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this previous one here, just so you could see how it worked. You can also go in here and select it from your outliner. So the object needs to be in your scene already. The next critical step that you need to do is, after selecting your actual mesh in the scene or object that you're going to generate the snow on, you're going to scroll down. And unfortunately, this seems to be a bit of a bug with blueprints. And you're going to scroll all the way down here because it puts it in this default category right here. And it says calculate mesh height. And unfortunately, I can't seem to get this up top with the rest of the options. So you're going to have to scroll down to calculate mesh height. Go ahead and click that. Sometimes this might take a little bit of time and sometimes it's pretty fast. It just really depends on what object and how many polys are in it that you're selecting to calculate. What this does is it takes that mesh and it calculates all the height data in it, and it's going to build some positioning there. Now we're going to scroll all the way back to the top here, and we are going to click there's a little checkbox here. It says generate snow. And you can see it's already checked on, but we still don't see any snow. We just kind of need to do a little refresh to it. So we're going to uncheck it and check it back on. So at this point, it's probably going to take a little bit. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it's pretty fast. You can see this one here was actually pretty quick. It's a fairly low poly model, not a ton of detail to it. So it's able to generate that pretty quickly. And so what the snow generation does is it actually takes a ray cast of basically snowballs and shoots them from the sky, and they land properly on your mesh. You can adjust the angles and sorts of things like that. I'll get into some of those options here soon. And it basically shoots those snowballs down, and then there is a remesh that happens, and it takes all those snowballs and puts them into one giant melded together mesh, which looks like snow. So this particular snow generator here that I have selected for this particular mesh, I've already dialed in some of the options to kind of get the look that I was going for. There are a lot of settings that you can change and dial in that specific look that you want, especially for your specific mesh. But you can see here it's already done a pretty good job. The snow has fallen. It builds up more or less in the cracked areas. You can adjust the angle of which the actual snow can catch onto things. So super steep areas, you don't necessarily want snow to build up on them, but you can adjust that if you choose to. There's lots of different options. The snow material is pretty decent looking. It's also got some displacement going on, and depending on your lighting, the snow material actually has some subsurface scattering, and there's a little bit of sparkles that are in there and stuff. So it looks pretty decent for what it is out the box. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple other meshes here, and then we'll go through some of the settings and options so you can kind of understand them a little bit better. So here we are with another displacement blueprint in our scene here, and I have another snow generator icon on top here, just because I want to be able to generate the snow separately for each of these meshes. So let's click on that there. And as I mentioned before, we've already got if the mesh is already selected for this particular one, we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom here to that silly section under default, and we're going to calculate our mesh height. You can see that one actually took just a little bit longer than the other one. It's a little bit more complex of a shape and object here. I'm going to scroll back up. We're going to uncheck generate snow, and we're going to recheck it back on. And now this part will take a few seconds because it's going to calculate and actually shoot the snow down on top and meld it all together in one giant clump. So here you have it. It looks pretty good. This is kind of neat. You're getting a pretty cool buildup, especially on the displacer where things are actually, the geometry is coming out of the sphere here where it would actually potentially catch the snow and gather up and build up for a pretty cool look. And lastly, out of our sample meshes here, this is actually a custom photo scanned rock face that I did myself. And I do have a custom material blend for some snow top here, and I will show you that here in just a little bit. That way you can copy and paste that into one of your own custom materials if you choose so. But let's go ahead and the SnowGen icon above that one, and we're going to scroll down again here. So this is a pretty high poly mesh, definitely higher than those displacer blueprints over there, and but it's nanite enabled and it's ready to go. So this is a pretty good example of what you could do with actual Megascans assets. So you drag and drop in a nanite or any other LOD version that you want. And you can easily place the SnowGen on top of that. So let's calculate our mesh height. This one will take just a little bit longer. And we're going to scroll back up to the top here, and we're going to uncheck and check our generate snow. We'll give that just a few seconds here, and you will see the snow is going to build up on it, and it looks pretty good out the box. I've already dialed in, again, like I mentioned, most of the settings to kind of get a look that I wanted for these particular sample meshes. So you can see we're getting it built up on these lower areas, and we even get a little bit of overhang, which is really neat. Kind of snow would kind of gather in an overhang position. You can see this rock face here is actually overhanging. So because the snow is actually falling originally from straight up in the sky, you know, this area here is technically not covered in snow because it is being blocked by an overhanging rock. So it's not, you know, just putting everything on the tops of things. It is literally, you know, calculating that as if it was actual proper snowfall. And there are some adjustments. If you're technical and you want to get into the blueprint, you can actually change the direction. So if you wanted to make it appear as if there was some wind and it was blowing from a certain direction. However, that's pretty technical. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but if you decide you want to dive into that, you can check it out. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the options here. I'm going to switch back to this plane here because it's a little bit simpler object and it's going to move a little bit quicker. So I have our snow generation selected here. And what we're going to do is you have under the category of snow generator, as I mentioned before, we have our snow category, our remesh category, and our displacement category. So under our snow is basically the settings that you're going to use for dialing in the actual snowballs, not the actual buildup of snow, but more or less the snowballs. So we have our generate snow checkbox here. And as I mentioned, you kind of use that to refresh the SnowGen when you need to do stuff. So every time you change a setting, it's going to want to recalculate. So if you feel like you might be changing multiple settings at a time, make sure you uncheck the generate snow, make a few changes, and then regenerate. That way you're not trying to recalculate each time you make a setting. However, we're going to go ahead and leave it on just so we can see it a little bit quicker in our settings here. So our first setting here is snow spacing. And essentially what that is, it is the amount of space between the snowballs. So if you imagine that the snowballs are shooting down in a grid on top of this area, the lower the value, the closer they are together. This one is pretty close. It's at a 2 value. And so if you want to spread the snowballs out a little bit more so there's not quite as many of them, you can do that with a higher value. If you want closer, probably better looking snow, you're going to want to keep that pretty close to each other. Next, we have snowball radius. So that is the actual size of the snowball. The smaller the snowball, you're probably going to get a little more detail and they're going to stick in smaller nooks and crannies of your actual mesh. However, you got to be careful going too small and generating too many of them because of course that's going to slow things down tremendously. You also have snowball height. So basically what that you can do is you can use that to help fine tune the actual depth or height of the snow as it builds up. I leave this as a default of 0.5 because I don't want it to just be a snowball. I kind of want it as a squished snowball a little bit because we don't need quite as much height in the actual snowball itself. And then next we have snow vertical coverage. And what snow vertical coverage means is how much of the vertical angle do you want to actually have covered in snow. So if you don't want steep angles, you know, or even moderate angles, you know, ledges, then you're going to want to bring that value down because you don't want to cover as much vertical area. So if you wanted to just cover your whole mesh, you can crank that up to like 1 and it will cover the entire thing in snow. So real quick, I'm going to show you how some of those values change. But what I'm going to do is under the remesh category here, you'll see a checkbox for snow remesh. So we'll get into that here in just a minute on how that is working and creating the actual snow top. However, I'm going to uncheck this because what it's going to do is it's going to help us to see the actual snow balls that are falling from the sky. So they don't really look like balls, they're a little bit lower poly than that. However, this will give you a good example. So as you're customizing some of the snowball or snow parameters, you're going to see how it changes your scene a little bit better and how it affects the actual snowfall here. So you can see how they're falling and, on particular angles, they're not dropping. I have the vertical coverage set pretty low on this particular one because there's really not a ton of steep angles here, only where some of it's displaced. So let's go ahead and take a look at our spacing. And I'll mention here, like I said, I have it kind of at a lower value here because I want them pretty close together, but let's take that up to 5. And so you're going to see it's going to spread those snowballs out quite a bit, which for a detailed scene, you're probably going to want them to be quite a bit closer. You can space it out and then of course, increase the radius. However, I want it to be more on the details and the cracks and stuff, but higher poly models, meshes are going to be a little bit harder to do. So sometimes when it's generating, you're going to have to give it some time. It's taking a lot of time to calculate and generate it. Next, we have the snowball radius. And as I mentioned, I have it at like a 1.5 at the moment. I can take it out up 3. You can see much bigger snowballs. Pretty simple. And we also have our snowball height. As I mentioned, I could take that up to 1. That's going to give them more uniform height all the way around. You'll notice, however, as the snowball lands, it actually is about halfway into your mesh. We want this because we want it to make sure it gets all the way through and not just, the center point of the snowball is what's actually stopping on top of your mesh. And of course, let's go ahead and let's take this back to 0.5. Let's take our spacing down to 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the snow vertical coverage. A good example is probably this area right here. These are some fairly steep angles here, and I have this turned down pretty low. I'm going to take this up to 0.8. And you're going to notice what that snow is going to do is now it's going to start landing on some of that steeper stuff here. I still haven't cranked it all the way up, so you got this area that's not quite covered, but we started to cover a little bit more of these angles here. So the next section here is the remesh category here. And so I'm gonna go ahead and turn that back on so we can actually get our snow to clump up together. And so what it's doing is it's actually creating a morphing mesh and inside of the blueprint, and it's putting it all together, kind of melting things together so it looks more like proper snow buildup. So the first of our settings here is snow thickness. So that is exactly that. How thick do you want the snow to basically build up on top of that area where the snow is falling? Like I said, you can slightly adjust this in the actual snowball thickness. However, it's better if you dial it in with this here to get a proper thickness. So I'm going to take this up to 5 real quick just so we can see what it looks like. And you can see here it got pretty thick on us. When it does this, it's not only doing the height, it is also expanding a little bit. So you want to be careful with that because it does start to expand out and over things. But maybe you want super thick snow, or maybe you just kind of want a lighter layer on top. Next, we have snow smoothing here. Now, this isn't in the snow category because it's more of a remesh option. And so right now I actually have it set at 0, but you can change this, and depending on your actual mesh and how the snow is building up, if it's a pretty detailed mesh, you may not want the smoothing on too much because it can cause actually some sharp points. But depending on your object, you may decide that you want to toss in a little bit of smoothing here. I'm going to do a 5 just for fun, and you'll see how some of the shapes of these are going to change. They look a little bit smoother, but you'll see sometimes you'll start to get some of this pointy stuff going on because there wasn't anything there, and it's going to start smoothing it and actually ends up kind of making it a little pointy. Our next option here is grid cell size. And so you can basically use this as a fine way to kind of detail your snow a little bit more. So the lower the number is a smaller grid. And so that will add a little more detail. You got to be careful with this one because it can definitely, increase what it takes to calculate the actual scene. I'm gonna go ahead and actually take it up from 3 to 6, and you'll see we'll probably lose quite a bit. Okay, what's going on here? So you're going to use that to help kind of dial in the actual situation and the mesh that it's falling on. So you can see 5 looks okay. Let's take it back to the 3. You're going to see here at 3, it's going to start covering our mesh a little bit more properly here. So this is really mesh specific. So you're going to have to just kind of play with that one a little bit. I have it defaulted to 3, which seems to work for most things. Our next option here is subdivision. So of course we're using that to help add additional detail and more polys to our actual snow here. So let's head over to wireframe, and you can see here it's a pretty dense mesh for what it is already. However, if you feel like you want to get a little more detail, you can actually start to add a little more subdivisions, or if you need something with less, increase or lower your subdivision count. And I think you're going to want to kind of have it fairly decently dense. It's going to look a lot better when it has a little more polys in it. Next, we have UV tiling and UV offset. So basically, we are applying a UV map to the snow itself, and basically it covers the whole area that the actual snow is being generated. So whether your mesh is this big or that one over there, you can set how many times you want it to tile within that area. Something like this, I actually have it set to about a 3. That seems to work pretty well. You get nice detail in the snow, especially if you get some closer shots. It looks pretty decent there. You're going to want to use the tiling only within this option here. Make sure you don't actually change the material tiling, otherwise it won't match up. And you also have UV offset if you decide you want to move that around just a little bit and offset it. And last but not least, these two options here at the end go hand in hand together. That is snow expand amount and snow expand steps. So if you decide you want to take the snow and actually just give it a little bit more expansion, you want it to kind of jet out a little bit and cover a little more area, you can do that. It's similar to the height, but not quite the same. It kind of goes in all directions. So it's a little bit different, but you could see how if you wanted a little bit poofier, thicker snow, you could use that. And the actual expand steps can adjust that a little bit. And you just kind of have to dial that in a little bit. So the last section here of our snow generation is actually displacement. So we're going to displace the geometry here of the actual snow based off of a texture map. So for this particular snow that I have here, I have this displacement map I dropped in. I have the displacement color channel set to 2. So 2 is going to work for most of your Megascans material. So if you decide to grab a snow material off of Megascans and use that for it, basically 0 is R or red. 1 is green or G, and 2 is B or blue channel. So most of the time Megascans use the blue channel as the displacement, but you can always check it, make sure. Also for a grayscale version like this, channel 2 works just fine also. Next, we have displacement power, which of course is that exactly. If you want to displace it higher values, you crank that up. And if you want less displacement, you bring it down. And last but not least, we have displacement center. So basically at a 1 value, that means that all the displacement is happening from that point on up. If it's a 0 value, it's from that point and down. And if you have it at a 0.5, it goes both up and down. So depending on your mesh, you may want to dial that in so that it matches up with your mesh a little bit better. So a few quick things to note and consider here. Once you have generated the snow here and you try to move the blueprint, it will actually move with it. So if you do happen to move this out of the way for any reason and you want to just get it back to where it was, you can always just recalculate the mesh height, in the default category again, and then generate the snow again, and it'll center back out on top of your mesh. Also, in this example here where we are putting it on a displacer blueprint here, if I was to change the displacement of this for whatever reason, I would need to recalculate the mesh height and of course generate the snow again because you have just changed it. So make sure you do that, otherwise it's not going to match up. So the snow generation blueprint is fairly performant, but for some reason, if you decide you want to go ahead and export it to a static mesh, you can easily do that with inside the modeling tools. So go ahead and go to your plugins and search for modeling and make sure the modeling tools are enabled. Let's hop on over. We'll switch our mode to modeling, and under the transform section here, there is a convert button. You click on that, choose static mesh, and you can choose where it goes. Let's press accept, and what it's going to go ahead and do is take the blueprint and convert it into a static mesh, which at that point you can nanite out or move around as you please. As you can see in our outliner here, this blueprint has now been converted to a static mesh. So really quickly, I wanted to show you how I'm doing the other additional snow here on the actual material and our rock face here. So if I select a rock and I go to our material instance here, I have some settings here under snow. This lets you adjust the color of the snow a little bit if you want to make it more white or a little bit blue. It also adjusts the actual snow power color. So the power of the color, if you need to bring that up or down a little bit. And then you have the blend bias and blend sharpness. You're going to want to use those numbers to kind of dial in how it lands and what kind of cracks and where it covers the actual mesh itself. Very quickly here, let's hop on over to the actual parent material here. And I do have a section that is commented out. So if you decided you could take this and copy and paste it into a Megascans mesh material or any other mesh that you're doing with the material on it, you can drag and drop this in there so that you can get this nice little simple snow coverage material blend here. And by combining that with the actual geometry snow generator, it gives it a pretty good result and looks pretty cool. So I'm really excited to share this with you guys. Version 2.0 brings in the snow generation, which the Displacer tool itself in 1.0 was pretty cool. It's a great way to take Megascans materials, turn them into actually displaced geometry on top of meshes. It's a great way to blend Megascans assets in with the materials that they offer. The snow generation just kind of takes it to that next level. And I'm super happy that we can finally get it into the Unreal Marketplace now. Also, by adding the snow generation in there, it's made the actual asset pack a little more complex. It's a great way to be able to add snow to pretty much anything. It doesn't have to be a displacer. You can add it to any mesh that you want. Megascans, custom meshes, it doesn't matter. You can stylize it so it looks a little more real, or you can give it more of a cartoony kind of stylized look. You can have your liberty with that. Change the materials of it, change how it builds up. If you want more detail, less detail, a little bubbly, not bubbly, the thickness, there's tons of options, and I'm really excited to be able to share it with you guys. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments down below. I'm going to leave links to both the Displacer for ArtStation and on the Unreal Marketplace. I'll leave a link down below for the original Displacer video too on my channel. So if you're new to the Displacer tool, make sure you follow that tutorial and video. It'll help guide you through that. Things that changed a little bit, but mainly just folder organization and so forth. Also, I'll leave a link down there in the description for the website, which covers a lot of the details and examples for the Displacer tool. And I'll be slowly adding in some snow generator stuff there also, so you can kind of get a little more details on it. And if you happen to make anything with this, some cool artwork, make sure you send it my way, email me. There's a contact form on the page there too. I'd love to feature it and, put your name on there. So that's going to do it for me, guys. I really appreciate you guys and all the support that you've already given into the actual asset packs and other things that I've been putting on the marketplace here. Don't forget, if you're into path tracing, I have a really cool glass shader pack on the marketplace too. I'll leave that link down in the description also. And until the next video, peace out.